Welcome to another episode of Mysteries Unknown. I got a really good podcast for you guys tonight, and I know I say that a lot, but this one, guys, is really good. It gets very scary. I've got Joe with me, and Joe had some encounters with some Class A encounters with Bigfoot in Alaska starting in 2017 and another one in 2022 that we're going to be getting into. But back when he lived in Louisiana, he had an encounter with something that he can't explain, and he lost 3 to 5 hours of time that he will never get back. We're going to be getting into that. And he had some vocalizations happen to him, and he felt like he was surrounded by up to as many as 40 of these creatures on a glacier in the middle of nowhere in Alaska. This is a good one, guys. You don't want to miss it. But like always, I just want to say thank you for being here. Thanks for the support. If you've got a mystery you want to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. Let's jump right into the story. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Man, I'm excited to have you here. I'm glad you reached out. I know you've been watching the show for a while, but you've had some really incredible stuff to talk about with Bigfoot that happened to you in Alaska. So why don't you take us back to 2017 and kind of walk us through that process?
All right. So in 2017, I was working at a lodge in McCarthy, Alaska, which is pretty remote. It's 325 miles from Anchorage. I'd worked all summer and I was kind of beat. And a friend of mine and I decided to take my truck up to the toe of the Root Glacier, which is basically the end of the glacier. And on the way up, I got a real, like an ice cream headache between my eyes. And I told my buddy Bigfoot, just kind of jumped into my brain. And then I saw this animal. It was dark brown and it was moving from right to left. And it went behind this slight hill. And I'd stopped by that point. And this animal, I could see, maybe from just above the ears up. I couldn't see the ears. It was just a brown head that literally floated behind this little hill and kept going. So I told my buddy, hey, man, let's pull up there and don't slam the door. Let's go see if we can find this thing. He's like, okay. So we did. And I told him, why don't you walk down about 60 yards and cut into the little bit of brush there. And he went down and cut in. And when I knew he was in, I couldn't see him anymore. That's when I walked in. And I was hoping he'd flush whatever it is to me. And originally I thought, it's a bear. It has to be a bear. There's no such thing as a Bigfoot. So I walk into just past the brush line, and there's not a lot of brush around that glacier. So you can see. And I scanned from left to right. And when I did, there wasn't anything there. And then when I went to scan left, right to left, there was this brown Sasquatch there. It's like 6'5", maybe a little over 3.5 feet wide, about 3.5 feet wide, its shoulders, and it was built like a basketball player. It never looked at me. It did glance at me. And when it did, I noticed there was like a gold or a yellow as its eye, So the other thing I noticed is that iris or its pupil was just massive. I had no idea how it could see in the sunlight. And it was right in the sunlight. And then it took off super fast, jumped over some logs, took off again, and it was gone.
When you saw this creature, did you feel anything? Did you smell anything? Was there anything like that kind of out of the ordinary, obviously other than what was happening, but did you have any of those two senses at all, fear or smell?
The only thing I felt that was abnormal was a headache, an ice cream headache. I know that's weird, but that's what happened.
That's wild, man. That's why I always, in my opinion, there's more than flesh and blood with these things. And I know you've got some other experiences that we're going to get into. You've got a lot of things that actually happened to you. And I always like to ask my guests before we get into that, how did that sighting affect the rest of your life? Coming from not believing in Bigfoot and hearing of it but not believing about it and then having an encounter with one, how did that affect you?
Well, I think for the first 6 months, I was trying to figure out what was going on. If it hadn't been for my buddy that saw it, I think I was crazy. But we both saw it. So I'm not crazy. And then I went into, well, I just kind of blew it off. I watch videos and things, but it really didn't bother me out in the bush because it wasn't aggressive at all. So I wasn't worried about it.
I think that's a good way to handle it. And I think a lot of people, they bury it. They either bury it or they just, kind of blow it off or not sure what to do with it, man. And I'm glad that first encounter wasn't a bad one because, I know you spend a lot of time out in the woods and especially living in Alaska, what else are you going to do? I mean, you have to go out in the woods, but I know a lot of guys have these encounters and it just ruins that from them. It takes that from them. But I know in the email you'd sent me that you talked about being paralleled while you were hunting, and then also you had a couple of encounters with two of them, I think later on you said. So why don't you talk to our audience a little bit about that?
Well, I grew up in Minnesota and basically near Garrison, Minnesota, or Mille Lacs Lake. And there's an old hardwood forest in that area. I actually grew up on Kenny Lake. So across, the highway and down the road a bit is this hardwood area I'd hunt as a kid. And I hunted it, as much as I possibly could. So I was out there and more than once. I mean, it was fairly regularly where I would go out there and I would have something parallel me. And, back then it was like, what, what is that? No matter how many times I tried to run and see what it was, because it would be like right over there on the other side of the brush and I can't see it. So I'd take off and go look. There's nothing there. I could never find it. So that's that. That's pretty much that. And then in 2022, I think is the next one we were talking about. That the first thing that happened is, I have to walk. I have to walk to this physical rehab. So I'm walking down this trail, and it happened to be the same trail that I was on with the truck in the same area, which I'm wondering what's going on there. But I'm walking down this trail, and it's pretty late, but it never gets dark this time of year, and it was a little later than this, maybe a few days later. But so the lighting is, I call it blue. It's kind of a twilight, so you can't see really clear, but you can still see fine. To walk around and stuff. You just can't see details. So I'm walking down this area where this Sasquatch I saw before 5 years earlier, or whatever it was. Uh, and this thing, well, how do I put it? I thought I felt something or I saw something that it made me stop. And I looked and looked and looked and I couldn't see what I was, what had caught my mind's attention. So I stood there and stood there and then realized there's a 12-foot Sasquatch standing behind that 12-foot spruce tree. It was huge. And it was standing so that it would appear to be a shadow. But when you have that blue dispersed light, there are no shadows. So that's what my brain picked up on. I didn't know what I was looking at first. I mean, I stood there and looked at it for quite a while. And then I put my hand up and I said, "Hey, big brother," and I turned and walked away.
Good grief, man. That sounds pretty, that's pretty scary being that close with one of these creatures. And
Well, not only that, I can't run.
well, I don't know that any of us would be able to outrun one of these things, but it's probably a good thing that you didn't run. I think their instinct would probably to pace you out or chase you. But what details were you able to see with it being that close and especially lit up like that with the sky and stuff? Were you able to get any details?
There was not much detail because, when you're standing under the canopy of the trees a little bit and the diffused twilight, it's really hard to make out detail. So basically, all I saw was, the standard 12-foot Sasquatch. Its legs were, well, one leg I could see, the other was behind the tree, and about probably 40% of it, maybe 60% of it was sticking outside the tree. So I saw both arms, its chest, its head, and one leg. And it was black as black could be. And it never moved at all. I'm the one that turned and walked away. And I actually went about my own walk, my daily walk. And when I walked back through there, it was gone.
Well, you're a braver person than I am, man. I don't know that I would have had enough gumption to want to go for my walk. I think my walk would have been done for the day. But I guess being in Alaska, you really don't have a choice, especially if you love the outdoors. And I mean, you didn't have a bad encounter with it, so I can see that. I kind of have this theory that if you have an encounter with one, if you've seen one, there's another one really close by, and it makes me wonder if that one was close by when you had your first sighting, in 2017, because that wasn't very far, back.
No, it was less than, for what's weird is this state is massive and I've been all over the place. And I see two Sasquatches a quarter mile apart.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens a lot, man. And I think these things, they're in packs, family. I don't like to use the word family, but I think they're very, I don't know the word to use, family oriented. And I think they're in groups. They migrate that way. Maybe they watch each other. I have no idea. I know that there was a gentleman that I had on that had an encounter in New Mexico when he was a kid, and he said it was very odd because they come around the corner and this thing was on all fours in the middle of the road, and it turned around, he said, and it whistled as something back up the hill, and he thinks he was letting the others know that, hey, somebody sees me and things like that. So it's it makes you wonder why they do some of the things that they do. And but I know that you've got a lot of different things that have happened to you while you were out there, and I would love to hear more about that. I know my audience would love to hear more about that. But you talked about encountering something really, really evil in the woods, and that you actually lost time in that encounter. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that if you're up to it?
Yeah, I can tell you a lot. Basically, that was in the Air Force, and I was in Louisiana on Barksdale Air Force Base, and it was January 17th of 2000, no, of 1991. I'm sorry, about 2 in the morning. So I pull up to this area called CAS, CAS. It's a conventional weapons storage area, not nuclear, conventional. So I pull up to the gate and unlock it. It's one of my favorite places I checked because it was away from main base, kind of, and there was no way, nobody could get in there because I had the key. So I could go out there and chill out, and, walk the area, and decompress a little bit. I was a cop, you know. So I go open the gate, drive my unit in, shut the gate, lock it, and it was really foggy that night, and it was a little bit misty. And as I drove, I had a truck, uh, a Bronco, and I carried it. At the time, I was armed with a 9mm M9 and something called a GAU 5A, which is basically an M4. That's all. So I'm carrying that thing, and it's locked in the truck. So I'm going down. I have to check these bunkers. So I check these giant bunkers, and they have this big can on the front that's really a padlock. So you can really see it easy, usually with a spotlight. So I'm cruising down through this, and I'm looking at these cans. And I was looking at cans on each side of the road that day, so I could see them all. And as I got closer to the newer bunker area, which is at the back of this storage area, the fog started getting more and more thick, and things just didn't feel right. I felt like I was being watched. I was starting to get scared, which is completely not like me, especially when there's nobody out there and I'm armed at the teeth. So I keep going, and as I go in there, it's more and more terrorizing. So I finally get to the end of the old bunkers, and I got to go check the newer bunkers. And I'm telling you, I have never been that terrorized in my life, ever. worst terror I've ever had. 56 years old, and I've been charged by bears. It ain't the same. It's totally different. So I get up to, just past this last bunker, and I'm like, something's wrong. So I took out my weapon and I charged a round into it, put one on the pipe for the rifle. And of course, I had my sidearm on. And I get up close enough so I can see these bunkers, the newer ones, and they're cut open and all the doors are unlocked. And that's totally weird. It shouldn't ever be like that. So I immediately call it in and say, hey, man, this is whatever, police 6, I'm in the Cass area, I need immediate backup. I got unscare bunkers. And there's a longer pause than usual. And they come back and they say, clear the area yourself. We don't have anybody as backup, which is completely wrong. You should never do that. That's insane. So I knew there was another project going on base. And I figured that everybody was tied up because of this project that was going on. And I cleared the bunkers and there was nothing now. They're completely cleared out. So I knew that there weren't any enemy combatants or terrorists because they always leave junk behind. And I called it in and said the bunker's clear, uh, returning to base. And I still felt really, really creeped out and terrorized. It was like something truly wanted to terrorize me. And it was incredibly evil. It's hard to explain. But I got back in my unit, went back out to the gate, and I couldn't open the gate. It was like welded shut. And I prayed a little bit, and it wouldn't open. It didn't work. So this entity that I could feel now was behind me. And you couldn't see it, but it was close behind me. And I remember turning around and walking over to it and saying, will you please let me go? And I walked over and slid open that gate like it was on grease. Drove my truck through, walked back into the gate because I had to, locked it up. There's a passenger gate off to my right with a big key. And I go up to that thing, and now the thing feels like it's like standing with its toes to my heels. It is so close. And the key's not working on the fence, on the gate. And I turned around and I said, would you please let me leave again? And he did. It did. So I popped open the gate and walked through, locked it. I went over and I emptied the round out of my GAU, put it back in the mag, put it back in the truck. And I was going to get in and leave. And I could just feel this thing radiating hate. It doesn't hate it. I mean, beyond description. And it was angry. That was no doubt. So I turned and I walked back behind my truck, kind of near the gate, near the path or the vehicle gate. And I looked out there and I said, thank you. Thank you for letting me go. And it was like all the hate disappeared and it started floating way back by the newer bunkers. It was still evil. There's no doubt about that, but it started leaving. So I get in my truck and I hear somebody on the radio and I'm not sure who it was. So I look at my watch and it was 3.5 to 4 hours in there. It should take at the most, if, a little foggy, maybe half an hour. So what happened? I don't know what happened. I've been asked by like Wes from Sasquatch Chronicles, what do you think happened? There is a hole cut out of my life. I don't know what happened. And I've talked to professionals about it, and they say, well, if you get frightened, sometimes it can, you know, make you forget times. But yeah, I was scared, but I wasn't frightened. There was nothing that stopped me from moving. It was hard to go forward. But so I get into base and I put my weapons away and I have to go debrief with the flight chief. my flight chief had went home because it'd been so long. So I debriefed with the day shift flight chief. And to do that, I have to go knock on his door, tell him why I'm late, what happened, and then I get to go home, go to sleep, and do it all over again. So I knock on his door, and he says, "Enter," and I walk in, and I'm like, "Senior Morse reports is ordered." He says, without acknowledging anything, he's like, "Did you see it?" I'm like, "Did I see what?" He says, "Don't give me that crap, Airman. Did you see that thing out there at Cass?" And I told him, "No, I felt it, but I didn't see it." And he says, "I'm giving you a lawful order. Do not ever check that area alone again. If somebody tells you to do so, you call me on a landline, or you call them on a landline and tell them you've been you have a direct order saying no."
Good grief, man. Joe, I can understand why now that you were able to continue on with your walk after having an encounter with Bigfoot, because that's nothing in comparison to what you went through, and that gave me goosebumps. And there's a lot of things in God's universe we just can't explain, but that's just pure evil. And you know, being in law enforcement, there's been places that I've had to search where you could tell that there was something there, and it wasn't flesh and blood. And so I can relate to what you're talking about. And for you to feel that thing as close as you could on your back like that, man, that is incredible. And and to have that amount of time missing, I know firsthand, like 30 minutes might go by. Like, I get it. Like, you can get 30 minutes, you can lose, but you're not going to lose 3 to 4 hours. That's just not. Nobody's going to do
Not in a
that.
fenced-in area.
No, not a trained police officer, somebody who's used to searching these things and doing these things. And you're right. My first thought was like, man, you never go in alone. But there's situations and times that you have to do what you have to do. And man, in my opinion, you're very fortunate to be sitting here to share those encounters and to share that. What do you think that was?
I think it was flat out a demon. It had to be. It didn't have a physical body, but this thing was as evil as it can get. I mean, I'm not kidding. My back is just crawling right now thinking of it. That was a long time ago. I was 22.
I 100% agree with you, man. You absolutely had a supernatural encounter, and I think a lot of those encounters tied to Bigfoot. My opinion of what Bigfoot is a Nephilim, fallen angel. I think it's demonic, something in that realm. And I think somehow they tie together. How that is, I don't know. And I tell you something else that's really strange. That after doing this for a while, if you've had an encounter of those sorts, the odds of you having another encounter are really high for whatever reason. And I don't know why that is. I don't know what that is, but you are very fortunate. And thanks for, being brave enough for sharing that with our audience, because that's a wild story. And you also want to say thanks for your service, man. Thanks for your service. Well, you've had a lot of things happen, and I know there's a lot more that you could talk about, and I'm all ears, man. If you want to go into some of these other things that happened to you that you emailed me, I know there was a whole list of things.
I don't know if I put it down, but the weirdest one that scared me the most here in Alaska was a stump that disappeared. So it was the same year I saw that big Sasquatch. I think it was 2022. It wasn't last year. So anyway, I was walking along the same trail again, and I was looking for that Sasquatch, you know, specifically paying attention to it, that area. And as I walked through the area, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. But when I was about to walk into the glacier area, I noticed there was a big black stump about this big, could quite put your arms around it. And a big black stump out there is impossible. And the reason is it's a receding glacier. There's no time for a big tree to grow. And that's what caught my eye. There is no way a big stump can be there. Just impossible. Totally impossible. So I stood there and I lit up a cigarette and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, how come it wasn't there yesterday and the day before and the day before that? And all of a sudden, this thing opened its eyes and they were golden. And at first I thought it was just flowers. And I'm looking at it and looking at it, and I thought, I got to go look. So I start walking towards it without my eyes coming off it. And my feet got a little tangled in a brush. You know how you look down just for a second to get it clear, and then you look up again? It was gone. So I walk over to that area, and I mean, I've been hunting my whole life and tracking. There was no tracks, there was no disturbance, and there was nothing, there was no noise, there was nothing. So from the time I looked at my boots until the time I looked up, it was gone.
Good grief! Now you said that the eyes, when you saw the eyes on the stump, that you said they were golden, correct?
Yeah, I thought they were flowers.
So your first encounter with Bigfoot, didn't you? And maybe I'm wrong, but didn't you say there was kind of a gold kind of tint to its eye when you saw the iris of its eye? I wonder if there's a correlation there somehow.
There probably is, and it may have been the same one. I don't know. It was black though. I mean, really black. That freaked me out. That was the most freaky thing I've ever seen up here. Now I've heard voices and stuff like that out there. Not in that area. Well, actually, in that area, I've heard the giggling. It sounds like kids or teenage girls, and it was an area where I just walked past. And you could pull up a satellite image or whatever, but it looks like the moon out there. There's no plants in the glacier moraine. So when you walk past an area, there's nothing to hide. I mean, yeah, there's rocks and stuff, but you hear them. So when I get out there and I was sitting there, uh, and basically praying. I don't really meditate per se. I heard these giggles, and they were just over, a berm of moraine, and it was, my best guess was 60 yards away.
Wow. How long did they last?
Well, they giggle went off and on for probably an hour and a half, and then they left. Well, I left actually.
That area is so strange. It makes you wonder why there's so much that is going on there. And I think you're definitely doing the right thing going out there praying, man, because that is some strange stuff. Do you go back there very often now at all? Have you been back in a while?
Much as I care. Yes, it's beautiful.
Man, I know you sent me a video. Is that the video of the place?
No, that's the Sheridan Glacier. That's another kind of weird area. That's where I heard all the talking and screaming.
Okay, so why don't you tell us about that, man? I'm so intrigued with all this stuff, man, and you've had a really incredible life and experienced a lot of stuff. So why don't you go and get into that and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what year it was. It was probably 2015 or 16. And I was out of Cordova, Alaska, which is a long ways from here. It's a 6-hour ferry ride to get there. So it's a long ways. And you got to put your truck on a ferry and then go into town. It's a small little town. Then what I do is drive 18 miles out and then head back in the woods. So it's probably 23 miles from town and then a couple miles. I don't know how far from here actually. It's on the middle of nowhere, you know. And I like camping there because it's so beautiful. So where I like to go, you have to go down a Forest Service road, and there's lots of Forest Service out there. Alaska's mostly federal land. So I go out on this road, and I have to cross. I have to forge two rivers that have a ridiculous amount of salmon in them at the time. Like I might run them over. There's a lot of salmon there. So I go back out into this area, and I like to camp there because it's so peaceful. And fishing's easy. You just walk down the road a little bit, go fishing. There's nobody out there. Nobody goes out there for the most part. So I'm out there and it's kind of misting. It's a rainforest, so it's going to do that. And I was sitting in a chair and I had one of those solo stainless steel burners, going because the ground's always saturated. I like to lift it out the ground. And so I'm sitting there with that going and I had my feet up on on a table and a headlight on and we're reading a book. And I hear the ravens kick off. They were something scared me. And I thought, well, okay, no big deal, not yet. And then I heard a bunch of owls, and I thought, well, I heard two owls, and I thought, well, that makes sense because owls eat ravens, and that would wake them up at night. And then eventually, they went back and forth a little bit. And then this owl did a hoot, and it didn't sound right. They never did sound right from the owls. And it turned into like a man screaming as loud as he possibly can and then dying. I mean, it was awful. And I've never heard something like that. I mean, I've heard screams, and I believe they may have been Sasquatch, but nothing like that. And I listened, and the whole area went quiet. There was nothing. It was just dead quiet. And it was so dark that night. It was like, one of those moonless nights, heavy cloud cover. You can't see anything. You can't see your hand or your mouth, your face. So I thought, well, I wonder what that is. I didn't know what it was. And then basically, they all started screaming out there. And at the time, I thought there are 40 to 50 of whatever these things are yelling. And I mean, they're yelling. They're screaming, and they'd scream and holler. And then there was this, I assumed it was a female that would holler, and it could speak while it was screaming. I, I don't know how to explain it other than that. And they spoke in like Yupik. Yupik is a language that's spoken out west by natives in Alaska, Eskimos basically. And it was like Yupik, but it wasn't Yupik. It was just different. Uh, the thing that kind of scared me off is I I assumed it was a male off to the left, and I had one off to the right. The one off to the left, I can't see, you can't see anything out there. I assumed it was bigger just because it laughed. And it was this big, deep, demonic laugh of haw, haw, haw. It did it over and over, and then the one on the right did it. So I had one on each side of me and a whole bunch of them in front of me. And I'm thinking, well, I'm laughing actually. I was chuckling because these things, for whatever reason, they entertained me. They really did. I didn't feel threatened. But once they were like, it sounded like they were partying or playing a game up on top of this hill, which I knew, in front of me because I've been out there so many times. There's a pond, and then there's a, you know, slow slope to a mountain or a hill. It basically is a hill. Uh, that's where I thought most of them were, covering that side of the hill. And they were having such fun and such glee. You could hear glee and joy in their voice that I thought, I think I'm going to leave. I didn't feel uncomfortable about not being invited. I don't think they cared I was there one way or the other. I just happened to be there. But there's the story about the Copper River devil monkeys. So the devil monkeys are told by natives, elders. And what happened is some natives were right next to the Copper River, which I was about 10 miles away, not even, I was about 10 miles away at the most when I heard the yelling. So I figured that in. I'm like, natives had said that these Copper River devil monkeys, or devil monkeys in general, but these specific ones, kill people. And a group of hunters, native hunters, were looking for, they were hunting and they bumped into these things once. And they were kicking around a human head gleefully. And that popped in my head, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going.
Ooh, I think that you made the right decision, Joe. I'd have been gone a long time ago, man, and I don't even know what to do with that. That is crazy. You were very fortunate, Joe, to be here to share these encounters, man. Because to be that close to something and for it to laugh like that, I sometimes I catch some flack on this channel because I think Bigfoot's evil. I do. I think it can be evil. And I think sometimes they're like people, you run into the right one, you're okay. You run into the wrong one, you're going to have a really, really bad day. But How do you explain that? And what do you do with that? Right? I mean, what are you supposed to do with that?
Well, people that don't believe in God and they don't believe there's a supernatural, I feel bad for them
Oh, I do too.
because humans, we are amazing things, but we can only see, according to scientists, we can only see 0.0035 of reality. So we're blind and we're trying to figure out a puzzle that, we can see tiny, tiny bit of that, it's just not going to happen.
It's not, and that's a good analogy. It's a good way to look at it. I think the only thing that makes sense is if you put God in the equation and you just know that there's things that we can't see, we don't understand. I personally have had 2 encounters with angels, and
Oh, I got a story about that too.
oh, I'd love to hear it. No, listen, Joe, I would love to hear it, man. And I'm enjoying the heck out of this. I love to talk to people who've had these kind of encounters and things like that. So, man, just why don't you tell us about it? I want to hear. So, yeah, we got time if you got time.
Oh, I was young and stupid. I lived in Minnesota. So I was going from Indiana. Was it Indiana? Yeah. Indiana to back home to Minnesota. And I was following a bunch of trucks and it was raining really bad, you know, thunderstorm. And it would just be a deluge and then it would let up and then it would do it again and again. And I mean, these guys are crawling. And I'm like, I'm a kid. I want to get home. So I pull out and I can't see anything. It's a dark night, of course. I pull out and I can't really see because I'm getting all the spray off the tires and stuff. I'm like, yeah, whatever. So I pull out and I go to punch it and I hear right next to me, there's somebody in the seat next to me. I'm alone. It says, don't do it, Joe. And I was mad because I was just really having a struggling time to get home. And, I looked over it and there was nothing there. And I'm like, F you. And I punched it. Oh my gosh. So I come zipping past these semis and of course it started raining really bad and I couldn't see it anymore. And it was like being in a submarine. And I just held the wheel as straight as I could and passed these trucks and made it.
Yeah, you always listen to that voice. You always listen to that voice. But we've all been there, man. Young and dumb. I've done those kind of things. I think most guys have done that. We pulled those tricks and those stunts, man. But yeah, that's really crazy, man. It's really incredible. I think that in the military and law enforcement, you kind of learn to hone in that sixth sense to hear those things. And I know there's several times throughout my career I heard that. One time I know we're all over the place tonight, but this is good. So guys, just stay with us. This has been amazing. But so faith has always been important to me, and I in law enforcement before every shift I would try to pray and it just listen to that voice. And so I worked at a really rural town, really small town, and I pulled this vehicle over, and as soon as I stopped, I lit it up. As soon as I put my foot on the ground, I heard that voice, let it go, let it go, let it go. And I knew that if I didn't walk away from that stop, that I would not be here today to tell this story. I get up to the truck, 2 guys, I'll never forget it, 2 guys, I get their IDs, and I knew that, I just knew. It was like 2:00 in the morning. Backup was 30 minutes away if they came, and I listened to that voice. And as the car drove away, I let them go. As the car drove away, I had that peace. And I was like, man, I did it for 16 years and that's not me. Normally I was like, a dog on a bone. I'm not going to let anything go. And that just was like, I knew that was God. I knew that was God that day. And I think it saved my life, but there's just so much in God's universe we can't explain and that we just don't see. And so that kind of leads me up to this question I like to ask everybody. And I love to hear people's opinions because there's no expert. But what do you think Bigfoot is, Joe? What's your thought on that?
Have you heard of the Elude?
I have not.
Children of the Nephilim.
Oh, now that I've heard of, yes.
It's my understanding that God let a few of them go. They didn't all go wherever he punished them or whatever he did to them. They didn't die in the flood. Some of them, from what I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, but he allowed them to go. And, because they were not as evil, maybe. I actually feel bad for them, and I can tell you why. They're human, animal, and probably Nephilim or some kind of a fallen angel. And yeah, they're probably evil. Some of them, most of them, who knows? But it's not really their fault. So I actually take pity on them. Sure, they're evil, but that's not their fault.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good answer, and that falls in line with a lot of what I believe. And that's the only thing that makes sense to me. I know, when I had my encounter and I looked at this thing, I just knew it was more than flesh and blood. I know that some people see these things and they're definitely, flesh and blood, and that's all there are. But if you look at all the things that go along with them and the encounters that happen and the way some of these things do, there just has to be more. And so, that's a good answer, man. And I definitely lean that way. I think that's probably what they are. But, I don't know, man, just so much we can't explain. But, man, I really enjoyed that, Joe. Thanks for sharing all those encounters and those experiences. And, I would love to come to Alaska someday and have a cup of coffee with you, man, and just sit over some coffee and talk about these experiences. But if something else pops up in the future, man, make sure to let me know, and I want to hear about it.
All right. Well, you take care.
Awesome. Definitely will. Guys, thank you for being here with us. That was an amazing podcast. I really enjoyed that. Joe's an incredible guy. So thanks for being here, because without you guys, this podcast would not be possible. So I appreciate all the support. If you've got a mystery or an encounter you want to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. And like I always say, stay prayed up, guys. We'll see you in the next episode.